If we look at some of the statements today in your speech today, you said if we wish to continue with some policies, there will have to be increased taxation, direct charges, or cuts elsewhere. So that's the basic premise of this.
Well, that's what Lord
review.
Sutherland himself said, actually. And it's also true that the Beveridge report commissioned by the SNP and Campbell Christie's report from the SNP actually focused on the issue of affordability. Free services might be desirable, but are they affordable? And Beveridge himself made a very simple point, which was, in tough times, would it be fair for those who can afford it to pay more in order that we can direct resources towards those who need them most? What I want now is an honest debate around that, and I think that is something that across the political spectrum, referring particularly to what Professor Kerley said, I would hope that people would get engaged in.
So then if we look at the specifics of means testing in particular, will you now review free personal care for the elderly?
Well, the point I was making is a whole series of policy choices that the SNP have made, and I think that we need to look at these and the consequence of them. If we look at one, for example, the council tax freeze, your reporter posed it as you either have cuts in services or you have what the SNP offers. But of course, we already have cuts in our services. I met with care workers in Glasgow this week who are talking about affecting their conditions, 15 minutes to go in and visit somebody, focus on task and back out the door. That isn't support for elderly. We know in our schools, school secretaries are telling me what's happening, how they're having to manage budgets, and young people who are teachers concerned about not being able to get a job. So these cuts are happening now. What I want to do is to have the honest debate that John Swinney committed to in 2010, that Beveridge called for and Christie called for, which says, in tough economic times, when there is austerity, should we look at these services and look, are they disproportionately benefiting those who are better off? So nothing is off the table. Nothing is off the table, but the test is, is it affordable? What are the benefits of it? And what are the opportunities that are lost? That is, for example, on prescriptions, we do know we have free prescriptions, but we're also the part of the United Kingdom where we released access to cancer drugs. We have got 2,000 fewer nurses than we did have 3 years ago. That's another consequence. I want to have a debate about which of these choices is a reasonable and legitimate choice.
But let's, for the avoidance of doubt, then clarify exactly some of the areas you're going to be looking at. So you will review free personal care for the elderly.
Well, certainly what it looks like currently, about 80% of people wouldn't be able to afford it anyway. There is a concern that the bit of care that people pay for, currently the charges are going up, and older people are concerned about that, and I've already made the point about the quality of the care. But see, my basic premise is, in all of these questions, you test them against the evidence. It feels to me currently that free personal care was a huge boon, and it looks as if actually you wouldn't get a benefit from getting rid of it. But you have to test it against the evidence. That's what I'm asking for.
But are you suggesting that it's not affordable in its current form and therefore some people should pay more?
What I'm saying to you is the kind of care that people's getting is unacceptable if you listen to what care workers are saying. So it isn't working.
But what are we saying about that? That we put more public money into that, or we means test?
What I'm saying is you make the choice. You make the choice, you look at it, you decide what are the benefits of it. Are we going to fund it? And if we're going to fund that, what else has to go? Or, indeed, we then look at taxation. Is there a consensus in the country about how much taxation we pay? Because what the SNP tell us, that it's possible to have high-quality services, free services, with very low taxation. And indeed, Alex Salmond himself constantly talks about cutting taxes. Everybody knows that if in Scandinavia, where you have got high-quality services, you also have a funding package that goes with that. I want to engage in that, in a very serious and difficult political debate about how we actually fund these things.
Because there are multiple options here, and they are difficult questions, if you don't mind, if we could just progress through some of the ideas to confirm what you're looking at before we actually get into the ideas of
I was trying to be clarified with what is underpinning this is the assertion the SNP make that we're living in this perfect world, and the reality on the ground is very, very different from that. And I want the debate to be as where Beveridge focused it and where Christie focused it.
I think that point has been made. So if we can just be quite clear, you will look at free personal care for the elderly with the prospect of some people having to pay for that more. Is there any merit, do you think, in Andrew Dulnett's suggestion that went into the coalition government that there should be some contribution of no more than £35,000 per person for free personal care? Is that an area you will look at? Will you consider all things in this?
What we're very clear about is what the benefits of free personal care have been. But I am concerned that it's not properly funded.
OK, and you've made that point.
I mean, I think that the issue of underfunding is very important. In relation to higher education, there's a grave concern currently that what is happening is there's a transfer of resources from further education into higher education. These things may be good in themselves, but they have to be delivered in a way that's actually
So you're looking at university fees?
We're looking at university fees. We're looking at how we fund our aspiration for all of our young people, wherever they learn, to make sure they get the best education possible.
You could be looking at university fees.
Schools, it is about further education, and it is about higher education. What we've seen in the SNP is an inability to direct that very tough debate towards. What they've done is they simply direct resources out of one into the other. Right. That can't be acceptable.
Okay, so we can confirm what you're looking at is free personal care for the elderly. You're going to look at potentially introducing tuition fees. You're going to look at free bus passes.
No, I didn't say that with respect. What I said was we need to look at the consequences of the current funding decisions made by the Education Secretary, which is taking money out. But if you're already critical of
these consequences, you surely must know what the potential options are.
Well, it may be. I have said in the past I'm not in favour of upfront tuition fees, but we have to recognise there's a funding issue there to make sure that our young people get a high-quality education, and we know the universities themselves are concerned about that. But we also know that the further education sector are deeply concerned about the cuts to their sector, and the First Minister simply tells us that that's not true.
Okay, so you've identified what you see as problems there, and you want alternative solutions. Would you put an end then to the council tax freeze?
Well, what we've said currently on the council tax freeze is it's underfunded. They have cut local government funding over a period of time, and as a consequence there are huge pressures at a local level. This council tax freeze is being imposed by the Scottish Government.
Yeah, so you're saying you put more money into subsidising the council tax freeze, or you'd end the council tax freeze?
What I'm saying is that we've made a commitment to address the question of funding local government. Okay. What the SNP are doing is they're expecting the council tax to wither in the vine. They're not funding the freeze, they're not meeting the gap, and they're not proposing another option. We all know that people do not accept the council tax. It's an unpopular tax. We've got no alternative coming from the SNP. We've committed to looking at that.
But what is your alternative to that?
You see, well, what I've said is that we are looking in more detail at what the alternatives are.
What could they be?
Well, it could be about improving the fairness of council tax, looking at other alternatives.
Does that increase your revenue base, though, just looking at the fairness?
Exactly. Well, that's the hard. There is a very hard question here, and we did lose this argument around council tax in the last election. So, I appreciate how difficult this is. But what you can't do is what the SNP is doing, which is imposing a council tax freeze, not funding it, and not looking at alternatives either, and indeed going into the courts to keep the information of the people of Scotland.
But one of your alternatives would be to stop the freeze on council tax.
What we've said is we have to look at the consequences of that council tax freeze, and indeed, as a care worker said to me only this week, I might get £1 of my council tax. Disproportionate benefits.
But you're already arguing that you know the consequences.
No,
that's what it's interesting. You're saying I have spoken to council workers who tell me this is the consequence of this.
What I'm reflecting something very serious that I'm having to deal with in my own response to what folk are saying. And they're saying the council tax freeze means that my conditions are poorer and the quality of service I deliver is greater, and families are having to catch up in that. That is not sustainable over time, and it is unacceptable to impose a freeze on local authorities, deny them funding, and then take no responsibility for the consequences of that.
If we look then, you've spoken earlier about taxation and the potential for increasing revenue. How much room is there for increasing taxation?
Well, that is the debate we have to get into now. The reality is, I know that in 2011 we lost the argument on taxation. People do not regard the council tax as a popular tax, and in tough economic times, people do not want voluntarily to pay more taxation. I understand that, but the equation remains the same. The high quality services cannot be funded with no money, and that's a huge challenge. And this is genuinely where I want to be where the SNP were in 2010 in asking some of these hard questions and trying to get to a place with the people of Scotland where we can have an argument about where that choice falls between taxation and services and free services.
Are the powers in the Scotland Act, though, sufficient, do you think, for the sort of freedom you would like in raising taxes?
Well, we're now going to another place altogether, which is how you might improve devolution. But I have said, and I think it's true currently, that within the budget that John Swinney has already got, he has made active choices. And what we heard today from the SNP is that those choices are over there and they've not to be questioned. We've not to look at the consequences of them. We've to leave them be. and we will deal over here with the remainder of the budget.
Okay.
And in my view, we've ended up with a budget that does not address the question of the economy, employment and education.
But if we just look at specific proposals that you might bring forward as opposed to reacting to what the SNP is saying, will the details of these proposals be available to the public for them to assess before any vote on independence in a referendum?
Well, we'll certainly bring these proposals forward as early as possible. What I have said, however...
What time scale? Definitely before the referendum?
Respect, what is curious is the SNP don't want to act on their own report ahead of the referendum. I want that debate up now, because whatever we do, whether it's on the Constitution, whether it's on the issue of service, we have to be honest with each other.
So you will go to the electorate before that vote to say, look, these are the absolute details and this is how we finance it.
What I'm keen to do is to go beyond the party political squabbling. We will do our part, but I think there's a bigger debate, it's a broader debate, it's reflected in the package. And it is about posing questions of what Christie calls competing demands, good demands on all sides. How do you make choices amongst them? It's not, you would not expect me, a year after I lost an election, to go off to a room, sort all this out myself and come back with a package. I genuinely want a dialogue. I want the SNP to live up to their own aspirations in the reports they commissioned. How do we deal in these tough times with providing high quality service? But what is not credible is for John Swinney to say that we have austerity cuts from the UK government, which I have condemned, a smaller budget, and that somehow these services must remain unquestioned.